Racism and arrogant dealings in Turkey are not originally directed against the Arabs or other immigrants, but rather, primarily, against the conservative sector, the religious sector of Turkish society, and that this phenomenon has historical and structural roots that go beyond transit political events. And it is perhaps the immigrant and Arab refugee in Turkey realizing that he has allies of the Turks who have suffered from marginalization and bias before, so he put his hand in their hands instead of falling into the pitfalls of violating flattening and harmful generalization, accusing Turkey as a state or the whole Turkish people of racism. Erdogan did not, of course, intend the phenomenon of discrimination based on color or race when he spoke about the White Turks and Black Turks, but rather this metaphorical expression was another kind of cultural racism and social discrimination, often suffered by the majority of contemporary Turkish citizens, Turks, Kurds and Arabs, and others, at the hands of secular elites, whose Muslim community treats many contempt and superiority. Perhaps terms such as White Turks and Black Turks are strange to the ears of Arab readers, but they are not alien to the Turkish political scene. They are important terms to enrich the controversy over racism in Turkey these days, and to understand the racism that the Turks themselves suffer in their homeland, and they are the deepest roots and more firm than racism against Arabs, Afghans, Africans and others. Important academic studies have been issued in the English language on the dualism of the White Turks and Black Turks, including the study of the Turkish Academy Sidon Demir Alp, the Turkish Turks and the Black Turks, the deep breakthroughs behind the secular Islamic contradiction, issued in 2012, and the study of the German academic Christophe Ram, Beyond the Black Turks and the Turkish Turkish. The Turkish elite's message in preparing a diverse society, issued in 2016, in addition to the study of the Turkish historian Dogan Gorbinar, The Intellectuals, the White Turks and the Children of the Earth, The Mental Life in the Conservative Turkish Thought, issued in 2018. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke in an official breakfast at the Presidential Palace in the holy month of Ramadan in 2015 to a wide audience of his citizens. Erdogan also spoke once to the Turkish public, saying, "In this country there is a distinction between the White Turks and the Black Turks, and your brother is good," meaning himself, belongs to the Black Turks. Turkey. He described himself in other speeches and statements as Black Sia Turk. However, the development of Turkish democracy during the past 2 decades, after the political wandering and seasonal military coups that resemble the Arab counter-revolution today, opened the door to the deep Anatolian society with its ancient Islamic values, to compete with the alienation of the vicinity of power and wealth. It is thanks to President Erdogan and the Justice and Development Party to break this monopoly and superiority. Since his arrival in power, Erdogan has led what he called a silent revolution against the alienate elites on its society, and opened the doors of power and revolution to the wide audience of the deep conservative Anatolist society, and brought the state services to every part of the country after it was almost confined to the major civilizations, and even only in some of its neighborhoods. But Erdogan's control and party over the political leadership did not break the cultural White Turks' thorn, their media and their adherence to their historical right to monopolize the formulation of the state and the people over their whims. It is noticeable that the more Turkish democracy expands and matures, and includes more social sectors that were marginalized in the past, the more nervous White Turks increases, and their intolerance against Islamic identity and Islamic social values that brought broad social sectors to the circuit, crowded with the pistons, and broke their monopoly of power, wealth and status. It is also noted that in recent years the White Turks elites have sought to expand their social base in an opportunistic manner, so it was touched in sectarian and ethnic color, after the dominance of the minority sons to lead some major opposition parties. So an alliance arose between the White Turks from the traditional Kamalan with some sons of religious and national minorities in Turkey, as we saw in the recent elections, and the hostility of this alliance became Islamic culture, and its urgency on the traditional Anatolian society, a sectarian stance, but it covers the curtain of nationalism and secularism. The Turkish situation from this angle is similar to some phenomena in the Arab world, as it reveals that the slogans of nationalism and secularism are often just a transparent puss, behind which the spoiled minorities are resolved to ride the back of the spoken majority. It also resembles the coalition of the pseudo-elites on their societies in the Arab world with military tyranny, because it helps them to freeze the movement in the social peace, and continues to monopolize power and wealth. He also intended to resemble this alien and dealing with the religious sector of the Turkish people with the racist treatment that the European whites in the United States and South Africa were treated with their citizens of African descent. Professor Sidon Demir Alp believes that contemporary Turkish society has been forced since the establishment of the Republic in 1923 to eggs and Black Turks. This is because some of the urban elites in Turkey, known as the term White Turks, insist on monopolizing power and wealth, but rather that this is the natural thing that cannot be objected to, and deals with the conservative Anatolian depth society with superiority and contempt. The White Turks seeks to distinguish from their broad Muslim community, in the lifestyle and appearance, and even in the tones of the conversation, and, as if they live in a Swiss canton, as my friend, Professor Kemal Öztürk, the former head of the Anatolia News Agency. They are associated with emotion and in the West, and they are almost out of their skins to become Europeans. They adhere to the claim that they are a civilized class, and that among other people of the broad community are a barbaric or semi-barbed. The White Turks elite is traditionally focused on the western coast of the country, opposite the deep Anatilist society in the center of the country, which constitutes the majority of the Turkish people and its historical depth. It is traditionally supportive of the army and military rule, and is satisfied with the strategic dependency of the West. It also uses defamation and contempt weapon against its citizens who adhere to their religious identity and their authentic social values. Press articles have spread during the first years of the Justice and Development Party rule that mocks these religious citizens who pollute the beautiful Istanbul coast, accompanied by their veiled wives, and their upcoming customs in eating and drinking, according to the vision of the secular elite. One of the female writers was described as a racist language of the Istanbul coast as not only similar to the Arabian Peninsula, but also Ethiopia, and the deputy head of the Opposition People's Party, mocked President Erdogan once, saying that Erdogan does not improve European dance, which indicates the superficiality of the false alien elites in Turkey like the false elites in the Arab world. It should be moved away from the language of generalization and violation of collective symptoms, such as saying, Turkey is a racist state or the Turkish people are a racist people. It is true that there is racism in Turkey as it exists in all countries of the world, but talking about this in a generalized moral sin and strategic error. President Erdogan himself and his government and party team belong to that broad sector of the Turkish people who previously suffered from discrimination and marginalization within his country, and at the hands of citizens of his skin. They are an ethical and strategic ally of Arabs against racism, discrimination and bias. A large part of the Turkish people is an ally of the Arabs against racism, and these are the greatest blackness, and the social depth that remained marginalized throughout the 20th century. The hand of cooperation with these must be extended, instead of helping the racists to them. We must not forget that Turkey, led by Erdogan, sacrificed the support of the Arab peoples with its political and economic relations with several Arab dictatorships of a decade. Millions of the displaced Arabs received from their homelands, and they guaranteed them to live in safety and freedom, after their countries narrowed them, and their homelands persecuted them. The bottom line is that the Arab and Muslim followers, who are excited by the recent incidents of racism in Turkey against Arabs, Afghans, Africans, and others, must be armed with a more accurate understanding of Turkish internal dynamics, including the dualism of White Turks and Black Turks. It is very important to understand the historical formation of the phenomenon of racism in Turkey, and its internal logic directed against the vast majority of the Muslim citizens themselves, and dealing with it with a conscious strategy, and seeking to build broad political, social and cultural alliances in the Turkish interior against this racism, rather than emotion, improvisation, and response is the task that is harmful and useless, and may increase the exacerbation of negative phenomena, instead of containing them. If it is in Turkey, egg Turks, and Black Turks, then in the Arab countries, Arabs of eggs, and Arabs. I do not mean the color and race, despite its existence, but rather I mean the sociological meaning, as it accounts for false elites who are surprised by power and wealth in a number of Arab countries, and besiege the rest of society with poverty and oppression, and even treat it with contempt and superiority, and supports military coups against democracy, and strengthens the external forces to consolidate their internal dominance. As for the shift of secular elites in the Arab world to the sectarian ditching, as is happening now in Turkey, in order to maintain their illegal sheep, he spoke and not embarrassment. It is sufficient to look at what has been happening in Syria half a century to see this. Whatever the case, President Erdogan and the Justice and Development Party have restored some balance between the White Turks and Black Turks, and opened the door wide open to the wide Turkish community to save his country from the hands of the ancient tangible elites, and reconcile with the Islamic himself. The rule of President Erdogan and the Justice and Development Party, Sala Turkey, with its natural civilizational and historical environment, including the peoples of the Arab and Islamic world, for which the White Turks have long drew a bleak picture, and they looked at him with arrogance and contempt, just as they did with their people and their country from Black Turks, that is, the religious and conservative classes of Turkish society. Every human society has manifestations of racism, but racism is formed in every society according to a special historical path, and it is found with a special cultural mood. One of the peculiarities of racism in Turkey, which distinguishes it from some patterns of racism in Western countries, for example. First, it is a racist one that originally directed to the Turkish interior. I mean that it is the racism of the White Turks against the Black Turks, before it is racist against Arabs, Afghans, Africans and others, and this does not mean that it does not target some non-Turkish peoples, but it is at its formative origin directed against the Turks themselves. Second, the racism in Turkey is a manifestation of the struggle for the spoils of power, wealth and status within the bowels of Turkish society, as it is part of the struggle for the identity of the Turkish state and its strategic direction and its civilized affiliation, before it is a struggle with the Arabs or other peoples of the Turkish neighborhood. Third, the gains made against racism in Turkey during the rule of President Erdogan and the Justice and Development Party are great gains. This era opened the doors of power and wealth in front of the bold Turkish people, and restored to Turkey its affiliation with the Islamic civilization, after it almost forgot the history of its ancient people in line with the West.